Okay, so here we are at episode 7 of the Dev Space, and in the past we've spoken a bit about UX, prototyping, data storage, and last episode we spoke about how do we, from a developer point of view, keep a project on track when we don't know the specifications. How do we make sure, we can build in such a way that if specifications change, we're not stuffed. So that brings us to this week and talking about what is a specification, what is a good specification, why are they so important, how do we get them out of people who are not very good at giving them to us. And I suppose that then also comes up with what's the role of a product owner and what happens when we don't have one. So, and also just I thought we can look at the difference between specifications from a developer point of view and specifications from a project point of view. So over to you, maybe tell us a bit about yourself and what do you do?
Thanks, Anton. Yeah, so I come from a agile project management background and worked a lot with product owners in formulating or creating requirement expectations. And then I've also spent a vast amount of time in the DevOps space doing software releases and a bit of support. Yeah, so that's a bit of a background. And yeah, Anton, shall I go into some takes on requirements or?
Yeah, like to hear your view on all of these things, especially in light of the project that we're about to kick off phase 2, where phase 1, let's face it, had very limited specifications.
Yeah. Yeah, I really think specifications and requirement management is one of the firstly most important aspects of software development projects and one of the most costly. I
Yeah,
think often businesses underestimate the cost of not creating a shared understanding of requirements, because usually the first time a client or a stakeholder sees functionality is in a UAT phase, and for a change or requirement to get to UAT, it goes through vast number of processes and checks and time. So getting that sign off early as possible in the cycle, the most cost effective it is. And yeah, I find that, Anton, it's a really nice point you raise with technical requirements and functional requirements. And it's also often that non-functional requirements get overlooked, like performance, expectations. And yeah, I think it's a area I'm super passionate about, and there are so many, I would call it methodologies out there that highlights the importance of requirements. I think behavioral driven development is a big one where it's this whole sub niche in a way of developing which actually comes directly from how the requirement is documented. That requirement gets reused for test cases, for functional testing. So I think it's incredibly important. And working with projects with very, very limited requirements has definitely posed some big challenges for us and for the client.
and I mean, the opposite is also true is I just thought of the story again in my early development. I once got a requirement document. I don't know how many pages it was, but it was down to like icons and menu, where the menus are and where this named every single field. And I was like, you got to be kidding me. I was like, I threw this back at the guy and I said, this is useless. I said to him, tell me your problem and then let's discuss the solution. So, because he, kind of there's there's a level where specifications need to be. And to me, it doesn't necessarily need to be, this must be this label and this must use that icon. But it's like, what problem are we trying to solve? How are we trying to solve that problem? What process must the application do to solve that problem? And like, how are we going to confirm that that problem has been solved?
Yeah.
If you don't have those things, up front, it's like menus and icons and screens mean nothing, because you can't verify that the essence of what you're trying to achieve has been achieved.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think
And
Anton, that's what Scrum tries to promote with the user stories. It's
yeah,
value, little pieces of value. But that's a super nice point that one can often go on a tangent about, the color and the look and feel of something insignificant, but focusing on value and the why is certainly
yeah,
important.
you know, and
Anton, oh, sorry, continue.
and developers, especially architects, are problem solvers. Product owners aren't necessarily problem solvers on that level. Their job for me is to define the problem, define what they want to see in the application and how it must behave. And quantifying that is really difficult.
Yeah, yeah. That's a great point, Anton. I want to share a bit of my experience with requirement levels. And I've worked with teams where this product owner was very technical and he knew his domain very well. So his requirements were incredibly detailed in user stories, acceptance criteria, even a test case, release configurations. And the morale in that team was not great because the architect, engineers, the guys who are best suited to come up with the best proposition to solve this problem, got so caged in that there was a sense that this is starting to feel like a factory. I just follow instructions. And
Yeah,
then I've got experience with teams that had very or no, very open-ended requirements or just the one-liner. And that enabled the architects and senior engineers to be very creative, and they actually came up with incredible solutions with minor changes. So I think finding a balance in
yeah,
like how deep you go in is very dependent on the team and the skill sets. Um, but I think the most important, maybe a tip for some of the viewers is, I think regardless of skill sets and what industry you're in, if there's an understanding between the developers and the product owner on what do the engineers expect in what format, and you start getting a rhythm and an understanding that it's not a a requirement is not a fix. That's it. There's
yeah,
negotiations to say, but the tech guys know we can do this much better and quicker and more sustainable, less maintenance testing. So it's like a negotiation between this
no,
product owner and
absolutely.
team.
I remember one project we worked on. It was pretty simple requirements. I mean, there was nothing, but we had a UX guy on the team. First time and only time I've ever had a UX designer on a team. That solved so many problems, because he would take the specifications, he would then sit with the product owner, he would then come up with the UX designs and discuss, those would get sent around. We'd all agree on them. And that just made implementation so much easier. It made QA so much easier because he had documented, if you push this button, then this must happen. There must be these validations on these fields. There must, and so you didn't like, oh yeah, was like, we did it once, it worked, it got tested, it got released. And like, that was phenomenal.
Yeah,
But, the thing is, he was part of the dev team. He wasn't like the product owner trying to push these on us. So he was part of our dev cycle, and he did his work before the developers got the story. So I found that really effective. So that brings me to the question, what happens in a scenario where you don't really have a product owner? Where you've got a business person and then directly to the developers. And we don't get that intermediate of a product owner sitting there understanding the scope. How do you deal with that scenario? Who then lands up being responsible for all the specifications? And what's the process to develop a good set of specifications that the business person who has no technical understanding can interpret and sign off, and that the developers can then use to go forward on a development level?
Yeah, very good question. I think in practice, it always or mostly ends up being the team lead, the senior engineer or architect, coming up with originally the technical specifications and requirements, but then it evolves into the functional type of user requirements. And typically, should the team have a Scrum Master, the Scrum Master would also be involved with the basics of ensuring there is a backlog, checking in on, yeah, does this make sense? I mean, the requirement, does it make sense? How can we test this, etc. But I think a very important aspect is to get feedback as soon as possible. And I think a nice approach is to get the business person or whoever this is delivered to involved to see it as soon as possible before even during a sprint. In terms of capturing requirements, I think a really good approach is to do that jointly with the team if there's no product owner.
Yeah.
And ask one question with each requirement. Is this a user requirement, meaning will an end user use it? Or is this a type of technical backend type of requirement? And I think those two types of requirements are planned and managed quite differently. Yeah.
And so post this guy giving us all these crazy UX ideas, we then came up with a system at my previous company where we would, if there were changes to screens or, we'd take a screenshot, we'd pop it into PowerPoint or Visio, we'd put a whole lot of, bubbles on it, basically saying, this is what this button will do. This is what that new field will do. And so it wasn't just like 10 paragraphs. It was basically a single page or, a couple of those pages with, tagged and descriptions. And we found that was the most effective way to communicate requirements up and down everyone. The product people and the business people could understand it from a visual point of view, because it's like, yes, I click on that button and it's going to do X. Then the dev guys could go, okay, we need to add a button. The QA guys knew what it was going to do, and the dev guys, knew what to do in the back end.
Yeah.
And I've yet to come across a better way of doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially for people like me, I hated word sums. I could do the maths, but going from the paragraph to figuring out what maths you needed to do, they never ever taught me how to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was like, yeah, that's easy. No, it's not.
Yeah.
That part sucked. It's
Yeah.
like, I have no idea how to figure out what you want. There's too much ambiguity. Too much. It can be interpreted 4 different ways. It's like that takes effort. Whereas if I had a screenshot or a mock-up of a screenshot of a screen and a couple of buttons and, paragraphs, then I'm good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it also highlights the importance, Anton, of planning this together and unpacking it together
Yeah.
with the QAs, etc.
But when you said specifications were expensive, I was thinking it takes time and effort and multiple iterations to actually get to a clear specification.
Yeah.
And that is also expensive.
Yes. Yes.
Not as expensive as getting to the end of the project and realizing your specifications were wrong. That's more expensive. So it is money well spent up front. But that is, I mean, if you look at this project, we know we're going to have to put in a certain amount of time to get those specifications dialed.
For sure.
Whether the client wants to spend that money or not, it's kind of, he doesn't get an option, because we're not going to start developing until we get those specifications sorted.
Yeah.
And we're not doing it on our time. Heck no.
Mhm.
So that, I think, is really critical, is spending that time up front. I mean, I've seen it so many times, in other areas. Like my wife made a meal the other day and she made it from memory, and she's like, went to the fridge for an ingredient. Yeah, we didn't have stock. She's like, I thought we had. I'm like, nope, I used it 2 days ago. She's like, oh. And it's like, we built at a previous company this whole, it was supposed to be a platform that could be online and offline. It was a desktop app that could be online and offline. And they decided to do it in Windows WPF, whatever that stands for now. Windows Presentation Foundation. I don't even know if it's still a thing. And they got like a quarter of the way in, spent a huge amount of time, and then realized their one fundamental specification they couldn't achieve it. And it was at that point that the whole project fell apart.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was brought in to try and rescue it, but it was too late.
Mm.
If they'd brought me in the beginning, it might have been different.
Yeah. I want to just highlight something on that point, is that I often think that a engineer and a developer is almost the quality gate in saving the client a lot of money. And
Yeah.
that is with, if you commit to implementing a requirement and you have a lot of uncertainty, like you don't know if the outcome is even near what is expected, that is very costly. And I think that leads directly to your example of figuring out midway through a project, this project is not even possible, or the solution is not possible.
Yeah. I mean, we had a project when I first joined the previous company. I came in and they asked me to have a look at this. Besides the fact that the code was absolutely horrendous. And I told my boss at the time, my first or second day on the job, I told my boss this project is going to fail. How's that? It did fail. But they were kind of feeding us a specification at a time, and nobody had sat down and done like an end to end of, this is the entire process. They just went to, it was a NetSuite project. They just went, okay, we want this extra functionality in this table, and we need this extra functionality in this table, and then we need this in this table. And it was like, nobody sat down and worked out the process, the business process from beginning to end. And ultimately, it failed because that was not a coherent thing. And so how many times have you come across a scenario where specification A just is completely contradicts specification B in a different place? And it's like, we've had that where like, no, you can't do that because, of this other requirement. Like, no, you can't change that requirement because that'll affect all of this work we've already done and impact, the current database structure, let's say. And it's like, a lot of business people don't see the interconnectivity, but especially as an architect, you've got this whole blasted model in your brain, and it's like, nope, you can't do that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think it also ties into a backlog that's it's a
Yep.
living thing, just as a requirement spec. And I think in industry there's a big challenge with availability from the product business guys. And like the UX guy you spoke about adding value, I've also seen that there are many supporting roles like the business analysts or solution
Mm.
consultants that really helps in fleshing out this requirements. And I think the businesses that invest in those type of roles understand that
Yep.
the
And
sooner
then,
you fail, the cheaper it is.
yep, the sooner you fail, the sooner you get your, um, we spoke last time about developing in verticals. In other words, getting the database in, getting, the server side up, getting, the communication to the client, to the UX working, being able to do that whole vertical. And I think that's also important from a specification point of view, and from an overall, it's like, are we tracking, is this thing going to work? With the one app, we want to build a mobile app. And so it's like, the sooner we get that into Cordova, and the sooner we get that app out there, and, even if we sideload it onto our phones in the meantime, but the sooner we do that, the better.
Indeed, indeed.
And I think that's really important from a business point of view, is to be able to then present that in the Scrum demo, like, we've done this whole layer, and then they can begin to interact and see what's going on, because the sooner we present stuff, the better.
Yeah, yeah. I certainly see so much value in having a dedicated role that does, even if it's just capturing the requirements, that when you get into a planning meeting, that there's at least a list, an
Yeah,
agenda,
yeah,
and and then I would encourage teams that do not have a dedicated product owner to go and capture some requirements, spend time with this business person and ask him, what value does this give you? Is it what makes sense to you? Draw a little
yeah,
graph of his process. Yeah, there are many agile methods, user persona mapping, and really cool things just to understand the need.
yeah,
And from there on, ask your technical guys, how do we solve this? Get
yeah, yeah,
creative. And and I think lastly on the importance, oh, another really important factor is also the prioritization of requirements and
yeah,
also multiple methods. And I think if a team works, maybe spends two iterations on not really important requirements, then you're not really adding value. You are
yeah, yeah,
becoming an expense. So, yeah, I think in the agile space, there's very specific roles with
yeah,
specific responsibilities. But jo- in the end, if you have a type of cross-functional team, I think it's much more valuable than having an expert in their own domain. And I think, Anton, I think you're a great example of this, having the ability to create functional specs, technical specs, managing backlogs, coaching guys on
absolutely.
estimations. So,
Captain.
yeah,
Yeah, I've also learned over the years and this is what the last episode was about, is to develop in such a way that if requirements change, they don't stuff up my system.
yeah,
Um, and I think I've been burned so many times. I'm like, no, now I develop flexible, configurable systems. Like, you want to change specs on me? Yeah, it's okay.
yeah.
It's like,
Let me
just
change that
reconfigure,
config. Yeah, that's
and I
great. Tip.
think that goes a long way, is, you know, abstracting. But if you don't have a full set of specifications, it's difficult even to get to the point of abstracting exactly what this is going to do. And I think that's important. But yeah.
Yeah, that's a great
So
point, Anton. And that ultimately saves the customer a lot of money for having to
yeah,
rewrite complex code, and it enables your ability to deliver quickly. And maybe one more bridge, Anton, is breaking down requirements into really tiny pieces is also really important, because if
yeah,
you're gonna be looking at this very big requirement, it will impact your ability to test it properly and to get it out there properly.
yeah. No, you've got to have the macro view. In other words, you've got to have the 10,000 foot view and say, okay, I can see all the bits and pieces, how it's going to get, how the data is going to get from the one system into the database, how it's going to get processed, how it's going to land up in the other tables, how it's going to get out to the report, and understand that from a technical point of view, and also understand, okay, so we're taking this data, we're processing it in this way to meet a business need. Yes, that's met. We're presenting it this way. Does that make sense to the business?
Mm.
And then also understand, okay, well, what does that processing entail at a micro level, at a row level? What are we doing, and how do we make sure that that is meets the need and is performant and is stable and is testable and is all of those things. So we've got to run those parallels all the way through.
Mm. I almost see it as internal requirements. Some
Yeah,
people call it release requirements, quality. But if I know a user wants to be able to do a transaction via X button, that requirement actually involves in the end in test cases and perhaps configuration settings for someone that needs to deploy or release nodes. So yeah, I think it's very fascinating how each team creates their own type of standards for requirements.
yeah.
And I think if there's one type of owner for various parts of requirements management, it's really nice because they can govern the quality. Like, we're not ready
Yeah.
to start this. We don't know what the outcome is, or I don't know how to test this. This is going
But
back.
I also think it's important the role you played on the last project of kind of isolating the developers from the multiple questions and having somebody that the developers can ask on their team, and then they then go out to the
Yeah,
business person and can take the time and can do the communication and can maintain the backlog, because otherwise the developer never gets to developing
yeah, yeah,
and
indeed.
doing what he does best. We do
Yeah,
specifications because we have to, not because we want to.
yeah. Maybe an interesting topic for another episode is, what are the challenges and benefits of having a dedicated internal PO? So someone in your business, or having an outsourced type of either product owner or another consultant
Yeah.
product owner.
And I think also we need to talk about, the role of a scrum master
Yeah, yeah, it would be great.
and why the scrum master is different from a team lead.
Yeah, yeah, that's an interesting topic.
I've never really figured out that one out.
Yeah, many ads, many ads.
Because most of my life I've been the team lead, the architect, and the scrum master all together. So yeah,
Yeah,
I think that wraps it up. Specifications, they're important.
super important.
You get them wrong, you get everything wrong. But also, I think in many ways less is more. They're
Yeah,
clear, concise, you know, accurate is far better than pages and pages of waffle that you have to dig through to find something important.
yeah, yeah. And I think my closing note is feedback is a backup to save cost and to prevent damage. So
And
get
document
feedback as,
everything.
yeah, documentation. Yeah, getting feedback in a sprint or even on a local dev environment,
Yeah,
that is fantastic, because then you've got a yay or nay.
All right, thank you for joining us, Milan. Sorry, Christian couldn't make it. He had a bit of a crisis, so I don't know what that is about, but we'll catch you around.
Thanks, Anton. It was
Thanks.
fun.
Cheers.
Cheers.